This is Mark Dever in Sydney, Australia, and we have as our special guest today, Phillip Jensen. Now, you talk a lot about the spiritual situation in Australia today. I'd like you to explain that for people listening to this interview or watching it. You've said that most Australians are not atheists by conviction, but they are in practice. It's the religion they do not believe in, but which they practice, as opposed to Christianity, which is the religion they do believe in and do not practice. So most Australians today still believe themselves to be Christians?
Oh yes. Census forms, they not only identify themselves ticking the box about being Christian, but which denomination they no longer go to, effectively. So Australia's profoundly Christian. There'd be less than 10% would tick a box saying they're atheists, and most of them really are agnostics. So it's basically a Christian nation, nominally, formally. But the church attendance is tiny, and nominalism has dissipated in the last 40 years. So in the middle of the 20th century, still 40% of the population would go to church. But today it'd be nothing like that, maybe 10%. And nominalism drops out differently with different denominations. So the Roman Catholics are now losing their nominal adherents fairly steadily. The different ethnic groups, the Assyrian Orthodox or the Greek Orthodox, they're losing their nominal attendance. The Protestants lost it from 1950 through to, or 1960s really, through till the 1990s. So that there's only a small percentage, 2 or 3%, would be Bible-believing Christians in Australia. But it's not a philosophical, intellectual turning away from God. It's the sunshine. It's the beaches. It's other activities to do on Sunday. It's
You've called that practical atheism.
Yeah. It's materialism. It's consumerism.
So is Australian Christianity as marked by consumerism as I think American Christianity is, as you've observed?
No, I don't think so. It certainly is. You still hear of people going around shopping for a church.
Yeah.
That kind of language. And there is that certain sense of dropping in and out of things. But no, your whole mode of operation and thinking is free enterprise. Our whole mode of operation and thinking is much more socialist than that. So we're a mixed economy like yours, but we've had a greater power of the unions and of collectivist thinking as a way of thinking and operating. And so there's a greater sense of loyalties. I mean, that's why people can still tick which denomination they belong to, even though they don't go. Yeah. Because I am an Anglican, even though I haven't been to a church for 40 years. Mm-hmm. It's that I am. Whereas I think a North American would tend to say, well, I don't go to church. I'm a Christian generally. Because your ability to change denominations, change churches, start a new denomination, it's all part of capitalism and free enterprise thinking, which is not how we operate as a culture.
You are the Director for Ministry Training and Development for Sydney. So you have, even before that, you were unofficially looking after pastors. You're doing it now more officially. So I want to pursue with you questions about pastors and pastoral ministry. Fine?
Sure.
Great. All right, a simple question. Are long pastorates good things?
Horses for courses, as they say. I think there's a real ministry for interim pastors. We've never used this, but I'm sure there's a ministry for interim pastors, helping churches grieve one and get ready for the next. And to be, I think there's a real need for genuine church planters. We don't have them. Might not say we. America doesn't seem to either. That is, I'm not talking about people who plant a church. I'm talking about people who every 18 months plant another one. Yeah. Who are initiators who can get out and evangelise in the community, get it running, and then move on to the next. I think there's a real role for that. I've seen a few people who can do that kind of thing. But in general, and this is just sociological now, in general, our National Church Life surveys have shown that the denominations that have the longest pastorates are the denominations that have the greatest steady growth. And the denominations with short pastorates are the ones that actually decline. That doesn't make it right or wrong. That's just a sociological observation. We know other things. We know that the first 5 years, again, these are sociological observations. Whether they're true in America, I don't know. But we find the first 5 years, pastors report feeling very positive about their life and their work and their ministry, double positive. 5 years to 10 years, they report feeling very negative about it. 10 years plus, they feel positive. And so...
And you think that last section of positive tends to be more realistic?
Yes. The first one is not realistic, it's double plus. This is just plus. But the crazy part is they feel positive whether church is going up or going down. They just come to terms with being there and what is or isn't happening. The ones who see their church continue to grow and develop tend to be people who keep redeveloping themselves. They keep moving forward, they keep growing in understanding and learning. So to sustain a long ministry positively, you need to be a person who keeps developing. We see people changing around the 7-year mark, but that's most likely an expression of the emotional downer that people are on after about 7 years in a pastorate. That you've got all these dreams, hopes, issues in the initial part, and then things don't happen. You don't get the results that you're looking for, and so you get down and depressed, and the fights that you fought at the beginning in the honeymoon period, when everyone lets you do things, come back to bite you 7 years down the track when things aren't taking off. But if you stick through to 10 years, and that's why I think study leave, sabbaticals in that 5 to 10 year period can really help men to stick at it. But long-term pastorates have a great benefit. It depends on stabilities of places. I mean, I had one, it was 28 years in a particular church, but it was a kind of pass-through urban place. If it had been in a country village, I think they would have got a lot sicker of me a lot quicker. I'm not sure. I mean, I've never done it, so I don't know. I'm not sure.
It's amazing you can look back on a 28-year ministry in the past, isn't it?
Yeah. It's good fun.
Yeah. But if a brother is listening to this or watching this and he's wondering, he's a minister of the Word and he's thinking, I've been here 5 or 6 years, but just like you're saying, it's starting to get really difficult. And let's say he's ministering the Word faithfully. So he's not a charlatan, he's not doing anything wrong. You don't know any of the circumstances, but generally would you say give the benefit to the idea of sticking it out and staying there?
Oh yeah, I would. I'd go, I think the 7-year itch you've got to go through, and you've got to say, well, let's see how it looks after 10, in general.
Okay, so when a church is in a position where it's looking for a new pastor, so it's the pastoral transition is happening for whatever reason. You said to me when we were talking last night that growing...
I've changed my mind overnight.
No, I bet you
I
have.
have.
No. You said
I was just testing you out.
You said growing churches tend to look for something different, and dying churches tend to look for the same. And you think both are wrong.
Both are wrong.
Talk about that for
Both are wrong. Well, we've watched and surveyed churches. I mean, one of the things about Sydney Anglicans is, you see, we've got 250 parishes, we've got, I don't know, 100 churches. But it's a kind of little experimental bowl that you can look at, because there's a commonality amongst us, there's a similarity amongst us, and you can weigh up what is happening. And we see churches over a 25, 40 year period go through growth and then plateau and then decline. And that just is the normal pattern over 25, 40 years. Now, on the growth side, when churches are building, growing, numerically growing, monetarily growing, things are ahead, people are getting converted, when it's in the growth phase, the dynamic that's making this church grow, as opposed to the one down the road, which is preaching exactly the same gospel with a man who's much the same as, everything else is the same, but this one's growing, that one's not. In that growth phase, you want as few changes as you can get, because the growth generates change. So what you need is a steady hand. But if the minister leaves at that point, people go and look for a more dynamic man. We've had a really dynamic man, we'll get another dynamic man who will change us and take us in, because they're changed
to the next
people,
level,
and they want more change as they go getting. Whereas if you're on a good thing, stick to it. Don't change at that stage. You want someone with the same philosophy, style of ministry to keep the growth dynamic going as far as possible. On the other hand, when the decline phase they're in, people are all harking back to the old days. And so they're always looking for what they used to have. And so Mr. Jones is going, well, let's get Mr. Jones Mark II, you know, or we'll Mark III or Mark IV. Well, in fact, once you've come off the plateau and start to decline, you need to actually reinvent the church. So here, you've got to reinforce growth. On the plateau, you've got to reform, otherwise you'll die in due time. On the decline, you've got to reinvent. There's no point just reforming is too late. Once you start going down, you have to reinvent. Now, Capitol Hill Baptist, you arrived, it was on the decline. You reinvented, didn't you? If I got the story wrong?
Yeah.
It wasn't you didn't just reform, just change
Yeah,
some...
I tried to do it in an obvious way. I think you're talking about something maybe more obvious. I tried to, for the sake of the congregation there, do things inside the structures as much as I can, but kind of transform them or lead them to change in healthy ways.
Yes, but your membership list.
Yeah.
Tell us what you did with the membership list.
They didn't have, well, they had a telephone directory, but they had a fairly inactive list. They had hundreds of people on it who never came. So we worked to try to change that to where now I can carry around in my Bible the membership directory of the Capitol Hill Baptist Church.
There you go.
Where I regularly pray for these folks. And,
that's terrific. But now, how did you change the membership list?
You know, I'm only going to let this happen for a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Keep going. All right.
How did you change the membership list? Because it's a good story that pastors need to know.
We taught about what it means to be a Christian. So we used 2 ways to live a lot. We tried to make sure that if they were nominal Christians, they would either be converted or be bored. That the people who would come would be non-Christians who were spiritually curious or Christians who wanted to grow. That changed the atmosphere of the place. We started teaching clearly about what it means to be committed to a local congregation and started pushing that.
And what did you do at your annual general meeting?
Well, we at one point in May of May of 95, 96, we voted out most of our members.
How do you vote out a member?
Well, Baptists are very good at voting, Philip. We can vote about just about anything. And
voting out members doesn't sound a normal Baptist tradition.
No, it's an old one, but not one used much these days. But the people weren't coming regularly. And so we tried to contact all of them, and then we just made it clear that if they couldn't come regularly, we hoped they would join the church where they were. But we couldn't consider them a member of this congregation because they didn't attend.
So how many would you have voted out? 5?
We had 500 members, and we voted out 256. So we had 256 motions, 256 seconds, 256 any questions, 256 all in favor, aye, 256 all opposed, nay.
Individual names.
Oh, yeah.
Took more than 5 minutes.
Took a long evening, but I meant to sort of, water torture them into the idea of understanding we will not take membership lightly again. You're going to be committed to this congregation.
Now, that's what I call a reinvention.
Yeah.
All that. It's not just, hey, we just ripped up the place and started again.
Right.
You've got to teach people. You've got to try and preserve whatever good that there is in the past. But it's not just preaching.
Yeah.
It's not just teaching.
Oh, yeah.
You actually have to implement your teaching in the practice.
Yeah. Now, in order to do that,
reinvents it. And that then gives new growth. And so the new 25, 40-year cycle begins.
Philip, I love talking to you. And
it's good fun.
I know that that's going to be insulting to you because I just said something positive in front of other people. I'm sorry about that.
Just going to wipe it off.
But thank you for taking this time to do this. I do want to just remind people that they can read things you're writing at phillipjensen.com.
Yep.
So www.phillip with 2 L's.
2 L's.
IPJENSEN.
That's right.
phillipjensen.com. If they want to read some books by you or by others, any particular books you would tell pastors, make sure you have a look at this?
Well, by me, the key book I think that to grasp, remember it's written for university context, is the one Guidance of the Voice of God, which is really driving the theology of the sufficiency of Scripture home. And so
it fits nicely with prayer and the voice of God, obviously.
Yeah. Because that's, now, there are other books like devotion, things that I write, by God's Word, which flow out of the belief that the Scriptures are sufficient for what we need to know in ministry. In terms of other books that you read, I've moved to buy fewer books that I'm going to read once and to buy more books that I'm going to consult many times. So I'm a great dictionary collector. I like books that I go on consulting. Certain books changed my mind when I read them. I mean, lots of books, you know. I mean, I was a great beneficiary, I think, of Francis Schaeffer's writings when I was first out in ministry in the 70s. He really opened my mind up to all kinds of issues that I hadn't thought about. But one of the ones I always like is a book by Harry Blamires called The Christian Mind. The first half, not the second half. He's a bit sacramentalist for my views, but his demolition of our minds, the argument being that although Christians, we don't have a Christian mind, so we think like non-Christians, is a terrific blowing apart of your preconceptions. And attacking your assumption base is one of the most important things, because your assumption base is something you don't know you have.
Well,
and so anyone who can expose where my assumptions are, my preconceptions are, does me a great service, because then I can go back and construct properly, consciously, rather than just assume everybody thinks like I do.
well, thank you for answering and attacking some of our assumption bases, Philip. Thanks very much.
Mark.